There are 28 top professional baseball teams in Asia, spread across 3 countries and 3 leagues. However, one thing unites them all. They all have an English nickname. And for all but one of those teams, that's always been the case. Sure, there was a period of time where 5 of Japan's clubs didn't have nicknames, but in the case of the teams that are now known as the Hawks, the Dragons, and the Buffaloes, it's because they were founded without one, and the Tigers and Giants were forced to drop their nicknames by the Japanese government during World War II. But still, whenever they've had a nickname, it's been in English. The lone exception is the LG Twins, but that was before they were the LG Twins. From 1982 to 1989, they were owned by Korean broadcaster MBC, and were called MBC Chungryong. Regardless, in 1990, LG bought the team and renamed them the Twins. While some may point to a couple other KBO teams from the 80s and 90s, they aren't the same. The Samsung Lions, Haetai Tigers, and Bingray Eagles, now known as the Kia Tigers and Hanwha Eagles respectively, despite having Hangul and Hanja on their jerseys early on, were not called the Samsung Saja, Haetai Holang-i, or Bingray Dogsuli. They used the English nicknames and had it on their jerseys in some place or alluded to on their cap logos. I probably just butchered those words in Korean, but my point stands. Similarly, Taiwanese teams didn't really have English nicknames in theory early on, but they did so in practice. For example, while it's still common to call the Uni Lions by their Taiwanese name, Tonyi Shi, literally Unified Lion, they had Lions in English on their caps. It's a similar story for other clubs. They may not have been called that by the public, but officially they had English nicknames. Nowadays, though, that confusion is gone, as every team has their nickname in English on the front of their jerseys. Still, when one first discovers this about Asian baseball, their natural question is, why? The easy answer would be these leagues were trying to emulate MLB as well as the American occupation of Japan post-war, and while that is true to some extent, it isn't the main reason. One team had to get the ball rolling on the concept, and that, naturally, was the oldest continuous professional baseball team in Asia, the Yomiuri Giants. When the team was founded at a country club in Yatsu, Chiba, they met with a simple name, Dai Nippon Tokyo Yaku Club, or the All Japan Tokyo Baseball Club. I usually use the mixed language name of Tokyo Dai Nippon Baseball Club when I'm talking about them, and I do that in order to avoid confusion with another team, the Dai Tokyo Baseball Club, which eventually became the Shochiku Robins and folded in 1952. As well as winning the first CL pennant in 1950, they also signed the first black player in Japanese pro history in 1936, so they're too historically important to ignore. Anyways, while the name Dai Nippon Tokyo Yaku Club worked for the Japanese public when the team went head-to-head with a team of MLB All-Stars invited by their founder, Yomiuri president Matsutaro Shiriki, the next year would pose a problem. They wouldn't be playing in front of a Japanese audience in 1935. See, Shoriki had fallen in love with the idea of a pro baseball league, seeing it as the best way for Japanese baseball to grow to rival the Americans. So he set to work convincing other companies to create professional baseball teams. In order to give his new club some experience, he sent them on a tour of North America, playing whoever wanted to take them on, college teams, local semi-pro clubs, full-blown minor league teams, anyone. But this quickly gave rise to a new problem. The team's name. Because the first place they went to on that 1935 tour was San Francisco. There, they were greeted by San Francisco Seals manager Lefty O'Doul. O'Doul had done several barnstorming tours through Japan in his playing days and welcomed the club openly, but he had one concern: the name. See, the Tokyo Dai Nippon Baseball Club would be funding this trip through appearance fees and cuts of ticket revenue. If the team didn't have an evocative name, no one was going to come out to watch them, and no team was going to want to play them. The easy solution was, get a nickname. The club was open to it, but they weren't sure what they wanted to call themselves, so they asked O'Doul for a suggestion. O'Doul's answer came easily. Whenever he was asked what Tokyo was like by someone who'd never been there, he would often describe it as the New York of Japan, a big, bustling city with millions of people, a massive metropolis rivaled by few others in the world. So he said to the club, "Why don't you name yourself after a New York-based MLB team?" Seeing that Tokyo Yankees made no sense, and the Brooklyn Dodgers were only in the 3rd year of using that name, O'Doul suggested Tokyo Giants. And it made perfect sense. The club embraced the nickname, quickly got some jerseys made, and as they went to do their tour through the United States and Canada, they bonded over the nickname. It helped that they won a lot while playing under it, going 75-33-1. Now, Shoriki had heard of this nickname business and had approved it, but when the club got back to Japan, he suggested his own nickname, Tokyo Kinshi, or the Tokyo Golden Kites. This was named after a prestigious military order, the Order of the Golden Kite, which was awarded for showing bravery in battle. While this made sense on a conceptual level, the players rejected it, wanting to continue to go by the nickname they'd been using. Shoriki, to his credit, relented. And since the Order of the Golden Kite was abolished in 1946, probably for the best. The Giants also kept their English jerseys, at least until the war forced them to stop using them. Why? Well, that's simple. The league they were trying to unseat at the top was the Tokyo Big Six Baseball League. While it had only been around for a decade by that point, most of its 6 participating universities teams were much older, with Keio universities in particular being nearly 50 years old at that point. They used Romaji, the Japanese name for Latin characters, on their jersey, so the pro teams followed suit. The Tokyo Giants inspired some other teams to take on English nicknames, such as the Osaka Tigers and the Tokyo Senators, whereas other teams did not. Which also leads to another question I get asked a lot: why do Asian teams have company names? Well, the Hankyu Baseball Club and later the Nankai Baseball Club were both convinced to join the JPBL by the idea that they'd be advertising their competing rail services by playing each other. Both teams had essentially jumped up from Japan's corporate ball scene and were reluctant to distract from their ownership with a nickname. Japanese teams also didn't have set home ballparks at this time, and essentially played anywhere that could host them. Sure, some teams like the Giants, Tigers, and the Hankyu Baseball Club did have set homes, but most didn't, and some wouldn't until teams were forced to declare a home stadium in 1951. So, most teams refrained from using any kind of city name, and in its place, they used the name of the company that owned the team. Those with city names would largely fall back to this standard, with one exception, but most did not. And since the KBO and CPBL were put together from the best teams in South Korea and Taiwan's corporate ball scene, they defaulted to that naming structure as well. And that is why, to this day, all 28 teams in Asia have the company that owns them somewhere in their official name, even if it isn't used much in everyday conversation. The lone exception being the Hiroshima Toyo Carp, with Toyo standing for Toyo Kyogo, aka Mazda. Mazda hasn't owned the team in full since 1984, as rules surrounding team ownership meant they couldn't after they had been bought by Ford. So ownership transitioned to the Matsuda family, although Mazda still owns a 33% stake in the team. The only league of the 3 to use city names is Japan's NPB, with teams slowly adopting them over the course of decades. And even those that don't have some connection to the area they play. The Yomiuri Giants still have Tokyo on their away jerseys, but when they tried to take that away in the early 2000s, it was met with fan protest and possibly led to the departure of Hideki Matsui. Long story. The Chu in Shinichi stands for Chubu, the region of Japan which their home city, Nagoya, is the central hub of. Hanshin is both the name of the company and the name of the urban sprawl of Osaka and Kobe, as it is the Chinese pronunciation of the second character of Osaka and the first character of Kobe. Despite being called the Osaka Tigers, they didn't play in Osaka, or even Osaka Prefecture, so dropping Osaka from the team's name made sense. The only team that doesn't have any connection to the city they play in is the Oryx Buffaloes. The O in Oryx doesn't stand for Osaka, it stands for Oriental. The team used to have Kobe on their sleeve from 1991 until 2004, but they haven't been based out of Kobe since a loan season in 2006. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's flash back to the mid-40s. After the 1944 season was cut short and the 1945 season was cancelled entirely, the JPBL was looking to get themselves back on track for the 1946 season. The teams that had been forced to drop their nicknames brought them back, and everyone was looking to finally just have a normal season for the first time since, well, 1941. They even had a new revenue stream, with American soldiers in the occupying forces showing up to games out of curiosity, and when they did in 1946, they started to notice something. Why do some teams have nicknames, and some don't? Now, this has been a genuine gripe from Japanese fans over the years as well, but the Americans kinda brought it to the forefront. So after the season, the teams sat down and decided to have nicknames. Since the teams that already had nicknames were using English nicknames, they were the standard the rest of the league followed. English nickname, jerseys in Romaji. And thus, all Japanese teams have had English nicknames ever since. Flash forward to the 1970s, and NPB has a new problem. TV. Since broadcasts were still relatively primitive at the time, they needed a way to communicate who each player is. Numbers alone were not enough. A fan tuning in for the first time is not going to have a program sitting on their coffee table, and the production crew doesn't want to go to constant shots of the scoreboard, as that would break up the flow of the broadcast and generally annoy people who actually knew the players involved. So how do you communicate who is who? Well, with names on the back, naturally. But that poses a different problem. The Japanese writing system. There are over 2,000 kanji, and some pretty rare ones show up in names. And this is the 1970s television set, 480i. Nothing that complex is going to come through legibly. Hell, some players have names so complex they don't even put them on the scoreboard, like Takeo Daigo. Okay, so what about hiragana? It's already standard practice to use little hiragana characters over kanji and stuff designed for children, so why not just cut out the middleman and use it? Well, a lot of hiragana characters are pretty similar, and the accent marks, which change their pronunciation, might not show up well on TV, especially with teams like the Hanshin Tigers who used pinstripes. Katakana for foreign players also had a similar problem. If only there was an alphabet that was simple, legible at a distance, and easy to read. There was one. Romaji. But would your average Japanese person be able to read it? Yes. Romaji was and is everywhere in Japan, and people are taught to read it in school. Most people can write their name in Romaji very easily. It's not a problem. And most Japanese baseball cards, for example, are all Romaji on the front and Japanese on the back. People who ask this often say something along the lines of, why are their names on the back in English? And while I'm not criticizing them for it, Hanlon's razor and all, you don't have to know the language to be able to read the alphabet. To use a personal example, I don't speak Japanese all that well, but I can read hiragana and katakana. I may not fully understand what I'm reading in hiragana, but I know how to pronounce it. And with names, that's enough. But then, why doesn't the KBO or CBBL do it? Well, firstly, the KBO didn't allow foreign players until the late 90s, and before that, you could only play in the league if you were Korean or Japanese Korean. Japanese Koreans would use their Korean name while playing in the KBO. There's also the fact that Hangul covers everything, including foreign last names. As for Taiwan, it depends on the team. Some teams, such as the Fubon Guardians, have moved away from Chinese characters on the back of the jerseys, and the growing trend of indigenous Taiwanese players going by their indigenous Taiwanese names, as opposed to their Chinese names like Kangkwang Galigalao and Hagya Ake, has expedited this process. But there's also the simple fact that there is far less diversity in Korean and Chinese family names than in Japanese family names. The most common Japanese family name is Sato. There are around 2 million people in Japan with that name. That's about 1.5% of the population. Korea...
La Corea del Sud con Kim, Jung-wan, Naso, Lin e Hwang.
21% of the Korean population has the family name Kim. 14% have the name Lee. You need the player's full name on the back in order to differentiate between multiple players. And while it's not as bad in Taiwan, over 11% of Taiwanese people have the family name Chen. Lin, 8%, Hwang, 6%, and so on and so forth. Romaji makes a lot more sense for Japan for the simple reason that it's cheap, legible, and covers every player on the team. And if multiple players on the team have the same family name, you can just do what they do in North America and Europe. Put the first initial there. So, to make a long story short, Asian teams have English nicknames because Lefty O'Doul wanted to help a Japanese team sell more tickets while playing in North America. They liked it, other Japanese teams copied their example, which led to the Japanese league standardizing off of them, and when Korea and Taiwan founded their leagues, they followed Japan's template. And thus, Asian baseball teams have English nicknames. If you're wondering if O'Doul got any credit for this, yes, he did. O'Doul continued to work closely in Japanese baseball circles, taking both the Seals and a couple Major League All-Star teams on tours to Japan. In fact, His 1949 Seals tour likely saved Japanese pro baseball from a catastrophic split, but that's a story for another time. While it wouldn't be until long after his passing in 1969, he would be elected to the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame as a builder in 2002. A bridge in San Francisco would be named after him in 1981, and coincidentally, it now sits next to Oracle Park, the home of the San Francisco Giants. And the gate at Oracle Park that is closest to the bridge is known as the Lefty O'Doul Gate. As always, big thanks to my patrons. Their names are scrolling by on the screen right now. This is a bit more of an off-the-cuff video, but I get this question so often, I figured, yeah, it's about time I made this video. If you're new here and you like what you saw, like, comment, subscribe. We are so close to 6,000 subscribers, which is kinda nuts. But as always, thank you all for watching. I've been Gaijin Baseball. Peace.